Ladies and gentlemen, Lindeloff Air welcomes you to Tulsa.
Welcome to Panelism, a podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf, as well as some media related to comics and graphic novels. I am Todd A.
And I am now Adrian Veidt. That is my name. I'm changing it legally to Adrian Veidt because I have walked away. You know, it's interesting. Of all the things that I loved about the series, my favorite, and this is completely personal to me, my favorite thing is that it really solidified Veidt and slash Ozymandias is like my favorite character. When the movie hadn't really done that. The movie was like Veidt was so like the weakest character, and here it was like the strongest in my opinion, just based on all the shit they gave Jeremy Irons to do.
I'll tell you what, I did not expect, of all the things that I thought were like really good at capturing the mood and stuff of the book and movie, I did not expect to feel that ambiguity about did they do the right thing, and to have Adrian basically redeem himself for like murdering 3 million people in New York in 85 I was like, oh no. I'm left with like this feeling in the pit of my stomach, like this does not feel right. Like I thought justice had been sort of extracted upon him in its own weird way, but I guess Manhattan knew he had to keep him alive to be there in the clutch.
Yeah. But he wasn't redeemed. I mean, Laurie Blake felt the same clearly. So she's like, no, you're not redeemed. Like that was the moment where like they could have just like sailed off and be like, well, Adrian, you got away with it this time. Like, and very she's true. Like, no, fuck that. You're coming with us. And what better person to pair her with to extract that justice than Wade? Yes. I mean, I love that.
Right. The most traumatized person we've seen.
Yeah. I mean, and he would be the guy, given his circumstances, to absolutely like knock Adrian out, like as he was monologuing, like, no, fuck you. You're coming with us. Oh, yeah.
I love the little detail where he says, when was the last squid fall? And he's like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. I don't know. I recorded it in my squid rainfall manual. Yeah. No, it's. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go in reverse order, probably, or who knows? We're going to pop around this whole finale episode.
Can we cut to our summary of it? Did he stick the landing?
Did he stick the landing? I distinctly messaged you as I was finishing it, saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, clear yourself for landing. Lindeloff Air welcomes you to the city of your destination."
Oh my God!
Or not, it welcomes you to Tulsa is what I said. And it's like as much as this guy could, I think he absolutely did. It's just it's almost a little. I have problems believing it actually happened.
I feel the same way.
Wait, did I just dream that ending?
Yeah.
It was real ending? No, it was. Okay.
Like, I was surprised. I was emotionally invested. I felt satisfied. I didn't see, a lot of it. I mean, I don't know. I would just say I didn't see it coming in that way. You know?
Yeah. What was the biggest surprise for you in that regard?
Oh, it's hard to say biggest. What
was your most favorite surprise? Like, what was the thing like, oh, that was of all the things that I didn't see coming, I really like that one the best.
It's hard to say it's one of the things I didn't see coming, but I really liked, you go first. Go ahead.
The fact that Lady True's plan was the 7th Cavalry's plan.
Thank you. That is what I was going to say as well.
Oh, good. Because this whole time you and I have been wondering, like, well, what's her whole thing? And they sort of have been subtly pointing us to, her plan is to stop their plan. Like her Millennium Clock will somehow save him. Like she'll put everything right. She won't. And we kind of we're all sort of, I think, pointed in the right direction of Adrian's her dad. So it's like maybe she'll go the other way. But no, it's like her plan just is their plan, but better. You know, like she had like the full plan to actually pull it off. That was sort of floored me. I was like, oh. Yeah. And then
I thought that was a great fake out too.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people weren't faked out. Like they, you know, because she was such an inscrutable kind of character. Like we knew something was up. What's the other shoe with her? But then when it turns out like, no, she's just built a bigger, better machine. And I loved like a tiny little twist. I loved the idea that like that teleporter thing we saw them experimenting with the basketball wasn't the machine to transfer the power. That was just to get Manhattan in their building, like entrap it. Yeah. And the lithium battery thing, I was like, holy shit.
Yeah. There was, I mean, it's like he truly took, like Lindeloff truly took the Lost criticism to heart and was like, okay, every answer except for like maybe 2 or 3, but then even the PDpedia solved most of those too. So it's like, here's everything. And I feel like this was exclusively for me. It was like, by the way, Taylor, remember that owl ship you saw Judd in earlier? Actually, it wasn't the real owl ship. It was based on the design of the real Archie, which is right here. Here it is. And just that was such a cool, like they even took care to be like, and that's why that happened. It's like, oh, good. So now there's never, because like that would have been my first question. It's like, well, how the hell did Judd get the owl? Oh, that's how. Okay, right.
And what about just the game warden being revealed to be just another of the clones with a dumb mustache? Like, oh, it was perfect.
Now here's my question. When we saw him as, up until that moment, it was a different actor because that's how Veidt had to see him, right? Is that sort of what we're meant to take away from that? Or was it always that actor?
I think it may have always been that guy.
Because I thought it seemed like when he took the mask off, it was like, oh, it's the clone, but he had that line, that wonderful line of, I needed you to wear, like, why do I wear the mask? Like, I needed you to be the enemy, or I need you to see
a worthy adversary.
Yeah, and so it's like, I wonder if he almost didn't see him a little more as the comedian, like as like a different actor standing in for him. It just sort of had that vibe for some reason.
Oh, yeah. I just the pleasure I took in realizing that, of course, Adrian set up his own obstacle course. Yeah. Like, it wasn't Manhattan policing him or anything. It was Adrian was like, this is so dull. I need to, and they will only ever serve me. So I need to tell one of them the way you serve me is that you always oppose me. Like, what a hilarious reveal. Tom
Meisen, I can't remember how to pronounce his name, and then Sarah Vickers, they play Mr. Phillips and Miss Crookshanks, the clones. Like, what fun they must have had. I mean, it was probably really long working days because they had to play multiple versions of themselves across different, in different sets, and I mean, all of that. But it's just like they got to really just run the gamut, especially Tom Meisen. Like, he got to do he got to be Dr. Manhattan too. It's like he got to do the whole gambit and just like kind of hang out with Jeremy Irons the entire time. That must have been just a ball full of fun.
Oh yeah.
When they revealed it as that, I sort of laughed because it took me back to the court scene when he's just sitting there and they're like, day 365, and he's just kind of like, he looks sad. People on Reddit were like, oh, he looked sad, and I was just like, he looked bored as hell. He looked like he was so like disinterested in what was going on that he couldn't even say anything, which was really fun because when at the very end when Laurie says she's taking Veidt in at the end, he starts immediately basically giving the legal defense he should have been giving in that in the clone case, in the clone trial.
Yeah,
like he just started immediately going, I get this, and he's like, and then that's when Wade knocks him out. But it was just kind of funny how when it was a real scenario, he had to really like advocate for himself. It was instant, he had no problem. And then in his little obstacle course, as you called it, that was.
Yeah, and it also provided. I mean, talk about all the little little questions being answered. Is like, now we know. So after our last episode, where we talked about how bored he was in the courtroom, and I thought, well, he knows he's got to wait another year, so he's just he's bored because it's like, what's the point in offering a defense when I know in a year I'm going to be rescued? But now we know even more, which is like, he set the whole thing up. This wasn't like a real court of law kind of thing at all. Like this was his quote adversary that thought this would be the best way to oppose him. So yeah, he's beyond bored because it's like, oh my God, dude, there's no way to take this for real, you know?
I love that he he said, and then as his parting line to the guy, he's like, "Was I the adversary?" He's like, "No, but you put on one hell of a show." And then not much longer after that, it's his daughter that becomes his true worthy adversary. He even says as much when he gets teleported to Karnak. It's like, finally a worthy adversary. So it's kind of fun to see, like, it's just that streamlined and connected so well. It did feel like, this felt more like a movie, I think, than any of the previous. Maybe with the exception of the black and white episode. This felt like just a great movie. You almost kind of forget you were watching at the end of a series. Just the way it kind of incorporated it, just the pacing of it, the movement of it. And then we finally, okay. I was going to say most favorite moment, but let's backtrack. You had I said my most surprising moment, which sounds like it was yours, the reveal of Lady True's plan.
I honestly, I think my favorite thing was, just way to go, Lindelof, really. The egg callback. And the fact that it was placed earlier in the episode too, like when Hooded Justice, can't remember his name, Will. When Will says something about, you got to break a few eggs. That's just something he told me. And then it's like, a few minutes later, she's back in the house cleaning up. And, it was like, oh, my God, this is like, what a good way to do that. I think the best, most surprising thing was watching all the pieces. Like, it was like just watching gears sort of, turn together. Even in that same scene when, like, in the previous episode, John goes, look at the eggs or watch the eggs as they're coming out of the fridge. But he's basically telling the audience, like, watch the eggs. Like, this will be important. Right. Yeah. Even earlier too, he's standing on the pool right after he kind of manifests, and she's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "It'll be important later." And then, obviously we needed that. So when she eats the egg and starts to stride across the water, we're like, "Oh, that's what she's doing, the thing that he did, so that she can test whether or not she's him or has his powers." And the fact that it cut to black, I'm so happy. It was basically the Inception ending. It's like, the audience gets that's not the important question. Whether she is or isn't, that's not the important. It's just, the pondering the possibility of it. That's kind of, it ended in such a way that it answered everything. And then what it teased wasn't really like, well, in season 2, we're going to find out what, it's like, that's not, there won't be a season 2. That's not what's important. I love that they committed to it. There's so many cop outs that they could have taken. It just, so satisfying. Yeah, totally. I love that word, committed to it too. Another thing that you talked about in the last episode that I thought was a great callback to just feel like, they tied it up nicely was you made this comment that this happens in an era of racism. And it has to do with race relations and racial hostility and animus and stuff like that. But that's not always in the foreground of the story. It's just kind of the heartbeat underneath it or something. Mm-hmm. And to have that question answered too, I thought was really great. And then, I think you could nitpick that it's obvious, it's way too obvious, or not obvious, but it's way too neat that Lady True's plan and the 7th Cavalry plan was the same plan, basically. But I think that just sort of adds to the to me, that fits the Watchmen universe. That is the essential paradox of Adrian's original plan in 85 is do I wait for the nukes to kill this many people? And then there's this long drawn out argument about how we stop nuclear war, or do I just go ahead and kill this many people? And it frightens everyone into peace. Well, I have a little thesis. And I teased this earlier. I was talking to my friend Craig, who works at Epicentral with me. Shout out to Craig if you're listening. We were chatting. I sort of have this kind of thesis about because they made her plan their plan. It gave us the opportunity to look at the 4 different manifestations of power. And so you have the status quo,
right? Dr. Manhattan, I mean, they talk about it this whole episode, though, like he could have done more, but he was really like representative of the status quo. Like he's kind of he never really rose above his station. He sort of was an operator. And then when he had the chance to do more, he abdicated his responsibility. Then you have like in the 7th Cavalry, you have power in the context of like a very hyper right wing, xenophobic sort of, trying to think of the like extremist context, right?
Yeah.
Then in the case of Lady True, you have almost the opposite of that, which is this hyper aware liberal, but authoritarian. Almost, it's too far that way. It's like very authoritarian. What I know best, I will fix the world, and I'll remake the world in my image because I know it'll be better. That kind of thing. And then the fourth one, which is where we ended up, which is somebody who didn't crave power, who never asked for it, who was fighting the good fight all along, down in the trenches, doing the good work. And as a result of both her luck, but also her circumstances, all of these things, she's now potentially been given this power. How does she use it? And is that the best option of all four? I would say yes. So like the best option sort of, got the power at the end. And then it's kind of for us to think about how that would work, and how do we manifest that in our regular lives? Like that, if that was intentional, it's goddamn poetic, because it's just like, what a great message and sort of meditation to leave an audience on after 8-9 episodes of awesomeness.
I like that word too, where it's like meditate on it, because and that picks up exactly where something I wanted to say, which was, to me, that one of the really cool things about the graphic novel is it feels like the more interesting question that it leaves us with is, what does the world do when they realize what Adrian did? And there is this time bomb planted, which is Rorschach's diary. Mm-hmm. And so I think the book ends with like, you're like, oh shit, what's going to happen when the world discovers that Adrian Veidt did this to prevent, a larger war? Like, do they turn on him? Do the passions get inflamed, and the ideologies get inflamed even more? And so we've been left hanging this whole season with like knowing that this society knew about Rorschach's journal, but hadn't quite reacted to it, I guess, or were led to believe that like maybe those parts of it weren't published. I mean, I took away from the book that Rorschach knew Adrian's plan. I haven't gone back to the book to discover the timeline there and see if he knew it, like, or wrote it down or anything.
They knew. Okay, so in the timeline of the original of the Old Testament, as Lindeloff, I was listening to his. By the way, quick shout out again. There is a killer episode of Fat Man on Batman where Mark Bernardin interviews Lindeloff. It came out last week. So they recorded it knowing the finale was still to come. And it's just, he gets really into the weeds on everything, all the thought process that went into building the writer's room, to why he took on the project, the circumstances under which he took onto the project, like the demands he placed on HBO about like, it will always, we're not going to reboot it. We're not going to, all of these things that kind of led to what we got. Nice. Gets really into the weeds on it. Where was I going with that? What was I saying before that? I just...
Well, I'll fill in. I don't think we mentioned that interview on our last episode.
I think it was after that came out.
It was, you privately told me about that. Like, check out this podcast. So I would say like a hearty endorsement of that episode of Fat Man on Batman, or Fat Man Beyond, or something like that. Now, what is it?
Yeah, Fat Man Beyond. Sorry, you're right.
But yeah, I mean, I keep coming back to the gear metaphor. Like, it really feels like whatever, like all the care that they took in putting together that writer's room and setting these constraints on HBO, that this wouldn't turn into like what do you want to call it? Like a re-promotional vehicle, like another marketing sort of thing, like another Game of Thrones. Like, it was like those little constraints for this creative team really fell into place, and that all those the tines of the gear, the teeth of the gear, all locked together in this last episode. I love your summation that like you almost felt like you were dreaming through it, because I after watching it flashed back to us going into the Game of Thrones ending and thinking and it's recorded in our podcast Wednesday in Westeros. You can hear me the week before and the week after going like, just like It's not even a don't fuck it up thing. It was like, you've already fucked it up or taken enough shortcuts. Like, just come in for a landing. Just end it. Don't end it in a way where we have a bunch of questions, and it's like, that'll just make it even more unsatisfying. Like, it's already unsatisfying. Just end it. You know, give us a a mercy kill here, you know? And to walk away from that thinking like, thank God it's done. And then for this to feel so right was I don't know. I can't describe it. That was like the true like sublime experience of watching great visual medium there. So. Oh
my goodness. Do you remember? Okay. Remember when they first announced it? And then like all the press kind of surrounding it was like completely, it was like the Mueller probe. Like they absolutely, all the speculation that none of it was accurate whatsoever. You know, they're like, we heard that it's going to be a sort of a reboot, sort of thing, but it will be expand upon the story of the book. So you'll get the book, but you'll get all the stuff around it. Just all these different takes that just sounded horrible. And I'm like, like thinking in my mind, when it comes out, I'll probably glance at it out of sort of disdain, and just that will be the end of it. But then then you saw some interesting things like, and Jeremy Irons is Ozymandias. It's like, really? Is it?
Yeah.
Is that, I don't. All right, I guess. And that turns out, and of all the things, needless to say, like all that pre kind of press coverage is just horseshit, like top to bottom. And so it was nice to kind of come into this completely, like it was almost like Kingsman all over again. It was just like having my expectations like completely just thrown out the window. Like, I don't even know what's going on right now. Like, what a wonderful feeling, to kind of be back in the chocolate factory and just like you really can't second guess the thing, because we've become so sophisticated as audience members, just with all the good stuff. Like we kind of know very quickly what could happen. And while we can appreciate some shows for their, the art alone, if a story is predictable, And so it's nice to be like, I do not know what they're doing. Like, you think it's the book. Oh, no, it's not really the book. Oh, you think, it just kind of goes around and round and round. That was just such a beautiful, beautiful thing to discover. I had another point to make too. I'm just hitting upon all today.
Well, can I pick up on something we were wrong about?
Yeah, please.
Judd Crawford, absent from this episode.
Yeah, I was shocked.
I was too.
It makes sense. I mean, now that I've seen it, it's like, well, yeah, there really wasn't a place to shoehorn him in. I'm glad they didn't try, but it was shocking nonetheless. Shout out.
I agree. But we even said that in our last episode, and I liked the prominence of I forget his wife's name. June? Is it? Oh, I can't remember. It's another J, isn't it? Judy, Jane, Julia.
It's that wonderful redhead actress. What's her name? Frances Fisher. Jane Crawford. There she is.
Jane. I like her prominence in the like Cyclops pews in the church, and all that. Like, I really liked that she was this sort of dark horse character that came out, because like, you're right. Like, that actor is so amazing. Like, yeah. But
and she had this wonderful heel turn.
Exactly.
When she was hanging out with Judd, she was almost like a politician's wife, just like, and her voice was decisively higher in pitch. Go back to those voices, and she's a little like, and then she turns, and when Lori exposes her, she's like, well, that's what they wanted us to believe. I was going to be the plan. And you're just, all of a sudden, she becomes this just crazy villain. It was really fun she must have had a ball playing that part. I guess it's going to be really fun to go back and rewatch this now with all this context, because now things like Judd snorting cocaine during the party make complete sense. It's like, he was nervous being around these black people he's trying to manipulate, knowing full well that Dr. Manhattan's in his house and he doesn't know quite how to manipulate him. And it's just like, and now that you know that takes on such a different color. Like, it's going to be so much fun now to like go back and see it through this new lens. It'll be like a whole new thing. And even more shocking, when we first had the reveal of the Klan outfit in the closet, I think everybody was, there were some people who were like, no, he's just a flat out racist. No mystery there. And everybody's like, no, there's got to be some kind of, me included. It's like, I was on the he's Dan Dreiberg train. This can't be real. And I'm like, and now I'm like, if they ever do a Dan Dreiberg, well, we'll get to that. But it's still a little shocking to find out, like, no, he was just a hateful man.
Yeah. Well, or as Looking Glass put it, like, he was a white man in Oklahoma, or I think that was Looking Glass that said that, like, sort of like a, what'd you expect? Like, he can't be surprised by it, like,
Yeah.
You know what? I'll tell you, one of those great surprises from this episode was Keen Jr. telling the story. First of all, the monologuing was hilarious anyway.
Oh my God.
Telling the story about his lieutenant that ended up in Gila Flats or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was one of those moments where I was like, holy shit. Like that. What a great, like, if you're going to build a story that's this full of mystery, it was so satisfying to get every little part of that mystery revealed. And so, yeah, Manhattan zapped him, but not being like, you know, present as Dr. Manhattan in that moment, sent him back to his birthplace, his own birthplace. You know, like, what a crazy thing. Like, he didn't just explode his head. And to your point, like, and I love, you know, you had said something like, oh, yeah, maybe they saw the blue flash of light or something. And it turns out, like, no, this dude called him, was like, what the fuck? I'm in New Mexico.
And I love that they were smart enough to put it together. Like, I like it when the villains are just as smart as everybody else.
Yes.
Like, that's so important. Point. They're like, you know, we knew, it wasn't hard to figure out, but like, they weren't like, well, how did we would have never known that? Like, I mean, so many other movies or stories, the villains just aren't smart. And I'm over that. Like, the villains have to be smart, if not smarter than the main protagonist. But just the idea that there's this kid who's, and we even got the original Senator Keene, you know, as on screen, the author of the Keene Act, which played such a crucial story point in the original Watchmen in the Old Testament. So we get him there, his son giving this just batshit crazy. Like, I love that character's evolution over the course of the show, because he starts off and you're like, oh, what a wholesome guy. He's probably on our side, right? He might be Night Owl. Like, all these heroic projections, and then you get just another like Bond villain just cackling on as he undresses himself down to his Dr. Manhattan cosplay, and gets in this machine.
Another thing I loved that I didn't quite fully appreciate in the moment, but in retrospect, was that like he was the sort of like, he was one archetype of the superhero villain, where he's like, you know, he's so full of himself and his own like clever plans. He's going to tell everybody about it, but he hasn't factored in like this one crucial like detail. And then Lady True is the other archetype, which is like, she's so narcissistic, but she is smart enough to have thought through the details. It's just that you know, something legitimately unexpected happens, which is, you know, the goo from Senator Keene, like provides the way for Manhattan to send him to Karnak. That was great.
Oh, I don't know what I was going to say. I mean, I love the fact that they turned this character who I thought, you know, if Judd was going to be a good guy, or I thought that second gunman at Angela's house was Judd. And then so when you find out that he zapped that Manhattan zapped him away. They could have just left that guy. You know, who cares what happened to that guy? But the fact that they even turned that into a crucial storyline, like that feeling you have as you're sort of reveling in all that, it's the exact inverse, the opposite of the feeling I had as the last episode of Lost aired. And it's just like all these wasted plot. I'm like, I can't believe it was made by the same guy. Like, or well, one half of Lost was the same guy.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and it's so funny because I'm sort of tempted. Like, people bad talk Lost so much, I almost want to go watch it to see how bad it is. But the problem is, like, you gotta watch six. Yeah, exactly. You gotta watch all these seasons just to appreciate how much the ending whiffed. Yeah. But so correct me if I'm wrong, but I had heard during its making, like I remember in season 2 when friends who liked it said, yeah, there's a rumor that like one of the things he's doing is the writers are working sort of like away from each other so that certain surprises they write in, the other ones don't know, or something like that. Oh my God. And so I wonder now in you know, the understanding that like the care he put into this writer's room and setting up all these things beforehand, you know, how much that truly did contribute to Lost, like, you know, crashing and burning.
That's a great question.
You know, like, was it, and was that the problem with series television in the day? Because it's like, I was
just going to say that, because Lost was as much a victim of, you know, 26 episodes for ABC per season as, I mean, remember this, Lost, for all its faults, It was a killer show up until the last season. And it was the first show on network TV to insist for and get an end date. Like, that was like revolutionary. British TV has had an end date,
Right.
for most of their shows in time immemorial, but like American television, just you'd make a show and it would run until it just pissed itself and died. Like they would never end a show too soon. It's like no, like run it into the ground, and only then will we finally just like quietly wipe it away. And Lost is like no, we have to have an end date because we have to work backwards. That just made everybody like it instilled so much confidence in it. So then to have this plan. Just that was the whole thing the whole time. They have a plan, and then just it didn't happen. But I think if Watchmen had to be 26, 27 episodes, it would not be this. It would be something else entirely.
And I don't want to tank our landing on this, but I do think
more about Lost.
There are questions. No. I got questions lurking out there for. I'll start with this. Do you want a season 2?
Okay. Easy answer, no.
Are we going to get one?
I think legitimate answer, no time soon. It is. If you go back into that Fat Man Beyond episode with Lindeloff, he has said this is all he's interested in doing. He is not signing back up for it, and he says he hopes if HBO wants to continue it, that it's a totally new creative team, which they have precedent for, by the way, a la True Detective.
Yeah.
Because
that second season of True Detective was wonderful, right? That was the one that really proved they could really bring it over the finish line with a second season.
3 now, isn't there? 3 or 4. Maybe.
Oh yeah, but it was that second one that everyone went, "Oh, that sucked."
Yeah, but and that there's the risk too, right? Like if they bring in somebody who's not, if he doesn't want to do it, I'd be shocked if there wasn't another team out there who didn't have an equally interesting take.
Yeah,
I would love to see it. I just don't want it to be any continuation of this story.
Yeah.
I want it to be, like they could do any number of things. They could, give us 10 years from this point in time. They could give us the Night Owl story, like everything involving him up to getting captured. We could get that instead. We could get I would adore, and this is my personal thing, and if it's largely based on the Before Watchmen Minutemen edition that had came out, of all the
the comic books.
Yeah, they have a silhouette and original Night Owl kind of sub story that is freaking fantastic, and I would adore seeing a Minutemen era like Silhouette, because Silhouette's one of those other characters that you in the Old Testament, in the original Watchmen graphic novel, she doesn't really get much screen time. A lot like Hooded Justice, kind of, she's there and there's a little bit on her, but not much, hardly anything. She meets a grisly end. What an interesting character to dive into. And if you use like the original Night Owl, that could be really fun.
Well, I love this idea because honestly, this is one of the few things where there's not so much, there's not like such a wealth of canon about Watchmen that it really is like a great place for DC to just explore a bunch of different stories with the Minutemen or the Watchmen, like jump back and forth between those eras, like just show, do more of that, like bring in the third Nixon term and like what was going on with them then. And like, that would all be really interesting. And they don't have to worry about it being something like Superman and Batman, where these characters have already been played by dozens of people. And we have these, the like sort of headcanon about how we think it all fits together. Like, I love that idea. Like,
and
don't pick up in 2020 with this, pick up in 79 or something crazy.
And don't be afraid to cast, completely cast. Especially if it's a different time era, you'd obviously have to cast it new, but cast it with people who do their own take. Like, don't try to match the continuity of Gene Smart, with the original Sally Jupiter, if that's something you want to do. Like, don't just have it be whatever. What I don't want is a retread, right? So if they do anything, it can't. There should be 2 rules. One, it can never be something that's already done. So like you can't reshow, it can't be what if. It can't be like a what if kind of story. It's got to be something completely new that uses an element, and it doesn't have to be a strong element, just some element that exists in the original graphic novel. And you can be as subtle about that as you possibly can. And then the second thing, you kind of need to adhere to the ethic of Alan Moore and find that punk rock subversion of something that, that's the heartbeat of that book. So if you can, it's a subversion of so many things. But I think and maybe honestly, TV may not be the medium for it. Maybe it's a different medium entirely. Not movies. Maybe it's like Jesus Christ, you could even do some kind of crazy thing on TikTok. That's very like Watchmen. I don't know. Like, there's any number of ways to do it.
I was thinking too, like, was you were bringing up the Minutemen and what I was saying before about, filling in those sort of like, the timeline with non-canonical stories or something, is do an anthology series.
Yes.
Like, do a Mandalorian where there's that's not a true anthology, but bring in a different director for every episode, but bring in a different creative team and say, hey, each one of you is going to make an episode, and how
goddamn, oh my God, especially if they all look different. That would honor the comics medium so much by having different artists interpret. That of all the things about comics that I love, probably my top 3, that's in there. It's just like seeing a world through a different artist's eyes, but having that sort of grounding thing, whether it be the character or the narrative. That is such a cool thing, because it's like taking drugs. It exposes you to a different perception without leaving your body or leaving your house. You're just there. So having it, the HBO's temptation is to be greedy, and try to like they have shown
repeat it
as quickly as they can. Although they've shown restraint before, they seem to let shows have the room they need. But I wouldn't. Especially if they have that stupid HBO Max Plus Ultra, whatever that other new app they have coming out, which is useless.
Oh,
and it's just going to die on the vine. Like I imagine they're going to want to like have a flagship show or two.
I hope it's not this. We hinted at a little bit that we know we're getting at least 3 seasons of His Dark Materials, right? So
yeah, they're a season per book. So then
I hope that's sort of what they lean into rather than Watchmen.
Yeah, this. Aren't they doing like a Game of Thrones prequel at some point?
I know there was news about one of them getting canceled, but at one point they were like, there were going to be 10 different prequels or something.
I honestly, side note there, I don't ever want to see anything Game of Thrones filmed for like at least 10 years. Like, I want all of the George Martin's books to come out first, even if it takes another 15 years before I even it should be one of those things that's like, oh yeah, like it shouldn't be like, oh fuck, not again. Like it, I don't. Yeah. We can't have another Harry Potter situation on our hands where the series ends and like the most mediocre continuation of that idea is put forth for like 7 more years. Like that was the worst part about my absolute worst. The worst thing about the Fantastic Beasts franchise is that there has to be 5 of them minimum.
Ugh,
and
really?
So there's
still
3
going?
more. There's 3 more. And that first one was kind of delightful. And it's like, oh, that would have been kind of fun. And much like with this Watchmen, sort of discussion, they would have been smart to do like a Harry Potter anthology. So like every one is like a different, different era or a different character. That could have been cool. Just do like an anthology Potterverse thing. You could keep that going for 30 years and have something interesting to say. Doctor Who has proven as long as you keep it going, mix it up, give us different points of view, you can keep a franchise running just fine. But it's like, they did not. They have this half-baked idea. They let J.K. Rowling co-write, and that was her first screenplay. And you're like, well on her, but and then they have the misfortune of miscasting a character completely, even though the actor who should play that character does appear at first as that character, but then it turns out to just be a disguise. I'm talking, of course, about Colin Farrell and Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp should not, and not all of his ethical shenanigans aside, he's just not a great, he doesn't fit that part as much as Colin Farrell did. You're like, I want that. And then why did it change? It should have been him the whole time. where was like, oh, but yeah, and so then this terrible second one comes out, and if you haven't seen the second Fantastic Beasts movie, don't bother. It's so boring. It's so goddamn boring. And the first one wasn't, the most thrilling thing in the world. It was kind of fun to see flappers, in Harry Potter, but that was kind of like, oh, well, it's novel. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. But the second one is so goddamn boring. The ending, and I'll spoil the ending for those of you who don't know. The ending is literally Johnny Depp is kind of the Stalin-esque character he's not Voldemort evil. He's much more kind of like a political villain.
I think that was Lenin. Stalin was definitely evil.
Wait, they were both evil. I mean, it's.
Oh yeah, but it was Stalin who murdered the 20 million.
Yeah, well, that's who I'm comparing it to.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying he was not as evil as.
Well, no, because he does kill people. I mean, he's got sort of kind of a genocidal plan in mind too, I think, in this world. But like the movie ends with him like giving a grand speech about how they need to stop World War II. And it's like he says, like, I see it coming, and he predicts it. He's like, we need to stop it. And then the police come and break up their rally, and that's it. That's the end of the movie. And then they're like, there are 3 more of these to come. I just don't. I say all this because Game of Thrones has this opportunity in front of them to compete.
We're still drawing out the Game of Thrones thing because I have more to say about Game of Thrones too.
Good. Yeah, so we're back to Game of Thrones now. I was thinking, I'm like, especially I'm going to Santa Fe for Christmas, and that's the home of George R.R. Martin. Yeah. I'm not going to his home. He's just
Please do.
I would. Yeah. If I did, he might let me in. There's been stories that if you just kind of show up and. You catch him on a good day. He's kind of cool with it, yeah. I wouldn't advocate people go do that, but if you should find yourself.
I mean, my comment about it is what a missed opportunity. I think if he had finished at least one, but definitely both of those next books during the show's run, they would have sold like crazy, and it would have prompted all these sales of the first 5 books, et cetera, et cetera. But now that it's over and it ended in such a way, I think all the hype is done. Nobody's caring year to year, will he finish? Or at least the people that are, it's this tiny minority, and there's people like me who got into it because of the show, bought all the books up, and then went, no, the books kind of suck by the end, so I'm not buying the next ones.
Then there's people like me who I may grab if not the next one, then at least the final one, because I'm like, well, what would he do different? What would he do differently? What was his ending? How did he kill the Night King? Because it's got to be more interesting than what we got. It's just the more you ponder the end of Game of Thrones, the more you're just like, just let it go. It's there. We all were there. We all saw it. We don't need to talk about it. It's
and to circle
like
us back around.
Throw up at Thanksgiving. It's like we saw her. She had too much to drink. Let's never speak of it again. It's fine. We love her anyway.
To circle back around, I mean, this is a thing we talked about in Wednesday in Westeros so much I think we've talked about it in panelism episodes too, like an adaptation versus like what did you call it one time before Watchmen? I remember you had an adaptation versus like another term for this, but then with Watchmen we get this remix, and so it is worth visiting these other spin-offs, adaptations, remixes, and going, what did Fantastic Beasts do wrong, or how did Game of Thrones muff up that ending so badly? And I don't know, it's just Watchmen gives us this rare opportunity to go, wow, they nailed it.
Well, that's a really good question to keep pondering. I wonder then, I have this context because I listened to, again, the Fat Man Beyond episode with Damon Lindeloff. It was so revealing. He was so candid about so much. It was delightful to get that right before the finale. Like I really appreciate that he took the time, and then that he was so candid. But he explains how they put the writers' room together. He had at least half everybody who submitted, and a lot of people submitted works, and he considered work from like playwrights, existing TV writers, movie writers, anybody, and all the work that was submitted was just top notch. But anybody who he'd have a meeting, he'd take a meeting, and then he'd give his pitch, and if everybody was like, oh, that's the best idea I've ever heard, I'm so in. If they were too overly complimentary, he wouldn't hire them. If somebody like threw some shade at him or told him like, yeah, that's great, but here's what I do, they would immediately be on the list. Because he knew enough to say, I cannot pull this off myself. I need to be checked and balanced the entire way, otherwise we'll have fucked up. And then even on top of that, so once he assembled the room, it was about 12 people. Once he assembled the room, then he made sure that at least half of them had, knew the canon through and through, like were, disciples of the Old Testament, and the other half of the room hadn't read it at all, or were very, faintly familiar with it. So that you had this wonderful ecosystem where nobody was overindulgent. And that's really the kind of the theme. I think that what breaks Harry Potter, in the latest movie iteration, what broke Game of Thrones is that the people running things got too indulgent. And for Harry Potter, it was J.K. Rowling had, she wasn't hungry for it anymore. She just sort of had she's been soaking in this bath of this world. She passed out in the bathtub, and now she's just like, oh, whatever. And everything just kind of flows. There's no sort of critical eye to it. She just got so indulgent in her own world and nobody's there to tell her no. Another classic example is George Lucas and the prequels. I mean, Jesus Christ.
Oh my God.
I mean, that was kind of the first, I would say grand example. I'm sure there had been others prior with authors and such, but like in the modern age, I would think the prequels are the first case of this, and it's the creator getting too indulgent. Yeah. And by some fate, Lindeloff was smart enough to go, that can't happen. I can't, in my love for Watchmen, do something so dumb, so stupid that breaks the brand for a whole generation. Like, I can't do that to this book.
Yeah. I love that example of George Lucas because we talked about it on our podcast when we went all through those prequels about this mistaken conception we carried for a long time that the first three movies, the original trilogy, were the product of the soul, the sole creator, director, writer sort of thing. And that just wasn't true. Lawrence Kasdan was directing and other people were co-writing. There was the devil on his shoulder. Yeah. And notice that Gary Kurtz is not involved at all in the prequels. At all. He was banished because he was that guy. Like George Lucas just stopped. I mean, he wasn't banished, but he just stopped working with them. Well, and another great example are the freaking Hobbit movies.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that's like, Peter Jackson has this great run with Lord of the Rings, so well received. And, just loses sight of it. Like, gets caught up in that whole.
But wait, that is a good example. But there is the one twist to that is it was originally he wasn't going to direct it. He was going to produce it, and Guillermo del Toro was going to direct it, and we would have gotten that new, fresh, interesting take. Yeah, that sort of has maybe some shared sensibility, but is its distinctly own thing. And then he took it over, and then it went. The studio said along the way, oh, and by the way, it's no longer 2 movies, it's 3. So then that
was him.
Was it? Are you sure? I thought that was a New Line thing that they're like.
It may have been. I can't remember. But
regardless, it's a good example.
So many mistakes. Yeah, but I think he was given that auteur status. That was the word I was looking for, where he was he can do no wrong kind of thing. And I once again, I got to recommend Lindsay Ellis's trilogy on YouTube, looking at the Hobbit movies. Just look up Lindsay Ellis Hobbit, and you'll get them all, and they're amazing.
Ooh, I'm going to do that next.
Yeah, it's just like a documentary she kickstarted. Goes to New Zealand, discusses how this whole and how it destroyed the New Zealand film economy that Peter Jackson was basically responsible for creating. He then went in and decimated his.
He's like an Indian god. Like, I shall create what I destroy what I create and create what I'm sitting here thinking too about the Lindeloff writing room, and it kind of is. I'm sure this has existed before, but it really. I think sort of reaffirms this approach of a showrunner as facilitator more so than originator. He had this sort of take, but it seemed like, and again, this is highly contextual to listening to that interview. I really got the sense of this, so it's kind of hard. If you haven't heard it, it's probably difficult to kind of understand this. But like he really did. It was less. it was less, here's my edict, now go carry, go my minions, carry forth and bring this to life, which is what a lot of show running is. It's like, there's a top level decision. Everybody kind of, they maybe share in sort of the execution, but it's very much a top down system. And this is much more him going, how do I keep this machine working in balance? And if anything's out of balance, this machine falls apart. So everything has to be balanced, nuanced, checked and rechecked, almost like an engineer for an old timey train. Just sort of like walking out with his stopwatch, looking at everything, which is, if that has been proven to be a very successful method of show running, I wonder how much more of that we're going to see.
And you have such a great example of it that you texted me about today, which is season 3 of American Gods is happening with yet another showrunner. And I don't know if that news broke today, but I didn't know about it until you texted, and it just seems ridiculous. And
multiple actors have been fired, and not necessarily because of conflict, but just because they're hemming the show into such a narrow part of the book that I think there's only three characters essentially total for like most of it, which sucks for those actors because they'll probably have to book other shows or do other things, and then they may be replaced. Or just what a boneheaded thing to do. That American Gods, and for those of you who don't know, for a hot second, we sort of did a podcast about American Gods. It was my favorite, well, it still is one of my favorite books. I had high hopes for it. And then a lot of people like season 1. I did not. And since then, it's really been downhill. It's just a missed opportunity. It seems like that whole thing was made by people who never either liked the book or understood the book, or both. And so it's like you have to have a respect for the source material, but then in the case of Benioff and Weiss, Bennywise, as we now refer to them, as in the case of Bennywise, like they were such students of the source material. I think they were so indulgent in that they got too freaked out, or they freaked themselves out of a satisfying conclusion because they just didn't know how to honor. Like they were so scared of honoring the material that they couldn't honor anything. It sort of fell apart that way. They still. Because I am of the belief they did a lot. Once they took over from the books, they had a lot of interesting stuff, and it's hard to tell how much of that was George R. R. Martin's Cliff Notes and how much was their own. So it's there was good stuff there, but I really do wonder if the books had all happened before they concluded. It would have had to be a much better. They would have had that. They could have been indulgent in the indulgence in the books would have been to their benefit because we'd have that source material. It would have been proven. It would have had that nice grounding to it. You would have already satisfied or have been contextualized by a group of fans, to a proper degree. It would have made sense, and then they could have indulged it, and then their job was just interpreting it to the screen, kind of like what we're seeing with Dark Materials. Like that is. Conversely, the books have been written. The framework is there. The track is already laid. You just have to make the prettiest, most realistic train you can to go down that road. That's all you need to do. And then it's just about like really, indulging my love of this book and my love of this world and really trying to represent it as accurately as I've seen it in my head. That's what that show's about.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just going to bring us back to Watchmen, and just all those things you said. I really felt like Lindelof brought that to this, that respect of the source material, with the idea that I can't improve upon that. So I'm not even going to really try. I'm going to take this in another direction. And now I did not listen to that Fat Man Beyond episode because you sent it to me before the last episode came out. And I, as you know, wanted to go in as fresh as possible.
Oh, yeah.
So, this whole conversation just makes me want to go back and check that out. And like we've said all along, like just fully appreciate this whole series together now that I can watch the whole thing start to finish, well, let's be honest, one day is probably what I'll do.
It's going to, I can't wait. It's going to change. So my wife, Rachel, she wants to watch it. So I'm hoping to binge it with her.
Nice.
It's going to change the context considerably knowing the ending. And that's going to be, and that's going to be how I see it from now on. But that first time that I see it in that way is going to be kind of it'll feel just like a whole new experience. It's like, well, we know what this is about. We know when Judd goes over those tire, Don Johnson's performance when his car tires go out. Like we know what that's for now. Like we can kind of watch it in that nuanced way because he may or may not have known
I love your idea of like watching it for the looks he's giving to Cal in his house. You know, like that's. If you have not noticed, I'm trying to steer us to our own sort of soft landing. No, but I wanted to sum it up with like, you know,
let's talk about Harry Potter again, shall we?
Well, you know, I got this new iPhone, and let's do the Apple Tech Talk for a couple of.
That's right. We didn't do any tech talk this week.
That's true. Just Harry Potter chit chat.
That was relevant. That was relevant.
It was. No, I mean, we often talk about adaptation and, remixes. So this is all on point. Is there anything you feel like we have missed from this whole series that we've neglected to talk about? I know after our last episodes, I had a couple things, but I think I've gotten them out now. So
I had one quick point. So, if you are curious who Lube Guy was, that was one of the things we didn't deliberately answer on the show. PDpedia, which now has a lot more content on it, has a lot of pretty straightforward allusions to the fact that it was PD in the costume. It all sort of lines up. So that's more or less confirmed in the.
Do we get any point on like why PD would have done that?
Kind of. I filled in more of the blanks myself, though. He was in town with Laurie, so he was already there. He's clearly a huge sort of fanboy of the whole Watchmen universe. You know, like he's basically like a fanboy banging his crush. But all that, but he's got like that very, encyclopedic knowledge of the whole thing. So my guess is he sort of was inspired to dress up and just sort of like play the game too, and then got caught. Angela caught him, and then he took off. I forget what he was doing when she caught him. I need to remind myself of that. But yeah, that was, and it was one of those little things where they made it, I think, a little more exciting than it should have been, and so we got a little more caught up in it than it probably we should have been. But it's is what it is. One of my minor quibbles with that, with how everything shook out. I think other than that, everything else was. Oh, before we put a final pin in it, I just have to say real quick, the scene with Angela and Will in the theater was so worth the wait, because I was, as you remember last week, a little upset that, or 2 weeks ago, that she didn't get to talk to him at the True compound. And it's now that it had to happen in that way, in that location, and that brought everything full circle. It brought the theater at the end to the beginning. Just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Anyway, other than that, I think, was there anything else that we didn't get answers to?
Well, there are probably things we have not mentioned that did get answered or something, but I wasn't left hanging on anything. So that lets me know that the details I thought were significant were in fact significant and did get finalized, because there's always that thing in mystery box sort of plots where you're not sure what's a red herring and what's going to be answered. And I feel like we got answers to things I didn't expect. And so that was good to get like closure on some things. And I honestly was not so interested in the identity of Lube Man. I know in like our last episode, I had said maybe he truly was window dressing, but it begs the question, why weren't there more vigilante acts that we saw? I mean, I guess we did with Laurie, like she busted some, but the conclusion of that, because I just looked up on HBO on PDpedia to see what that last memo was, and it's the memo about the firing of PDpedia, and that there is of PD, and that there is a strong chance that he will turn to vigilanteism. And so it's like, that is pretty cool, like what a nice little Easter egg to kind of slip in there that you didn't really need answers, but it's nice that the sort of multimedia production of it brought us around to some answers. Yeah.
Well, I am over break. I'm probably going to read the Old Testament all over again. But this time, I mean, with a whole new appreciation or like a new set of eyes. And I'm going to do that wonderful thing where I'm going to basically put Jeremy Irons' voice into the entire time, because I will read that character now, with the exception of his before Watchmen version's a little different. But I'm going to read him in Watchmen now almost from now on as the way Jeremy Irons portrays him, because what I thought I would hate has ended up just charming me to no end. Like I love his interpretation of that character, and that brings me full circle. So I'll stop right there.
One other thing I gotta say, which is sorry if this takes us off topic again or on a tangent, is that like one of the things I appreciate through this whole series and that I hope to appreciate on rewatching it was how taut every episode was. Because as you were talking about picturing him in that, I was thinking to that flashback of like Lady True's mother inseminating herself and like all the little touches to that, like the portrait of Alexander and things like that. And I'm thinking like they did all of that in one episode. Like that is crazy. Yeah. And to think of those times in Game of Thrones where because they kept trying to bounce all over this continent, it just wasn't as taut and well told. Like, it just because and like I've mentioned before, like I remember at the time when Mad Men and Game of Thrones were airing, concurrently, I would watch them both on Sunday nights. And often I would come away from Game of Thrones like, oh man, you were just all over the place tonight. It was just a filler episode. Like it was important information, but nothing concluded. Whereas, Mad Men would like be tension from start to finish. Or maybe not even tension, but wound tightly, and Watchmen, every episode was so perfectly wound, and they showed that you can do that. Our attention span can last more than one episode. So you can do a whole episode on Looking Glass, and we're not going to forget who Angela Abar is in the next episode, and we got all those like long looks at like Looking Glass and Angela and Will and even, Adrian and Lady True, and it's like, this is wonderful.
I just realized while you're saying this out loud, both Game of Thrones and Watchmen are soap operas. They're high quality, high dollar soap operas, but they still follow the character dynamics and sort of story beats of a soap opera. Like watch Days of Our Lives for a week and tell me I'm wrong. And so and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that if you're going to compare the two, it's like Game of Thrones was playing like the traditional soap opera game. Watchmen found a totally new way to do it. Yeah. Like it still had some of those same tropes, but it's like Game of Thrones just kind of leaned into those tropes in the end. It's like, the princess dies in his arms by his own hand, like all that same, just that sort of cliche horseshit. Whereas this is almost like anything that was going to be cliche was either subverted or amplified to a ridiculous degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it was like, it was entertaining or interesting,
Yeah. What a good job. With that, where can people find us?
Well, we're online, panelism.inc. That's www.panelism.ink. And that is also our Instagram handle, panelism.inc. And find stuff there. We're going to be a lot more active here. Christmas has been this holiday, Todd. It's been a little exhausting, I think, for all involved. Well, for me especially. So I'm looking forward to next week, both decompressing, but also really getting all our content ready for the new year and a lot of fun stuff coming. So get ready for that. We're going to be back into the books in January. Obviously, we'll probably do an episode or two between now and then. And look forward to the next one.